My name is Donna Bartlett-May, and I'm going to be your moderator this afternoon for the candidate forum for the Chula Vista City Attorney. This forum is also being hosted, as was the other one, by the League of Women Voters of San Diego, Crossroads 2, and Southwest Chula Vista Civic Association. I'd like to welcome our two candidates, John Moot and Simon Silva. The League is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support or oppose candidates or political parties, and the views expressed are those of the candidates. Sponsorship of the forum is not an endorsement of any candidate by the League or the other sponsors. There is a League website now that you all should check out before you vote, called Smart Voter. It's now called Voter's Edge. There are some bookmarks out there, and it's votersedge.org. It has all the information we've been able to garner from all the candidates. Both these candidates today have put their information on there. So check that out before you complete your ballot and turn it in. This forum is being recorded and will be on our website in its entirety, in case you miss any of it. Questions will be collected from you audience members, and then we will screen them to make sure the topics of the greatest interest are asked. Assisting today will be Kate Palmer, our timer, and we have some screeners from the League, Stephanie Sontag and Beryl Flom. Candidates will have 2 minutes for their opening statements and 2 minutes for their closing, normally 1 minute for each answer, but because there's only two candidates and I don't know how many questions we'll have, we're not going to stick to that time religiously. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to let Mr. Moot start with his opening statement first.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the League of Women Voters for putting on this forum. The city attorney is only one of two citywide elected offices, along with the mayor. And with all the attention on the mayor's race, I think Simone and I were feeling a little bit left out. So I'm glad to be here, and thank you for inviting us. I've been a lawyer for 39 years now. Some of you may be familiar with some of my bigger cases. On behalf of the Sweetwater Union High School District, I filed a lawsuit using the civil anti-corruption statute against the 10th largest private contractor in the United States for bribing school officials. I argued and won a unanimous decision in the California Supreme Court, which resulted in $8.2 million being returned to the students and teachers of the district. For those of you who follow local news, you may also be familiar with an injunction I just obtained in an illegal $80 million bid rigging scandal at the San Diego County Fair. In addition to bringing a wealth of experience to the city attorney's office, I'm uniquely qualified to be your next city attorney. I served 2 terms on the Chula Vista City Council, including as deputy mayor. I have intimate knowledge of how local government works and the legal needs of the city manager, and the city council from a client's perspective. Leadership is vitally important in one of only 2 citywide elected offices. In addition to serving on the council, I spent my whole adult career serving the city in a variety of leadership positions. I'm the immediate past chair of the South County Economic Development Council, was twice the chairperson of the Center for Sustainable Energy, and led the county-wide Regional Energy Policy Advisory Committee. I served 9 years on the Sharp Chula Vista Hospital Board, as well as serving on the East Lake Educational Foundation and many other entities in the city. I believe my extensive legal experience and proven commitment to Chula Vista make me uniquely qualified to be your next city attorney.
Thank you. Mr. Silva?
Hello, well, I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank the sponsors and the attendees here. A lot of people don't know about what the city attorney's office is, and this is our opportunity to explain it. My name is Simone Silva. I'm running to be the next Chula Vista city attorney. I'm running because I love the city of Chula Vista. It is my home. It's where my wife and I bought our first home. We raised our children, and I see Chula Vistans doing amazing things on a daily basis. The city of Chula Vista is on the precipice of doing great things, and I want to help it achieve its goals. I'm uniquely qualified to be the next city attorney because I bring a diverse background, broad and significant legal experience, and a commitment to a principled leadership. My diverse background helps me understand the struggles that Chula Vistans faced on a daily basis. My father was a migrant farm worker and eventually became a janitor. We lived in poverty. He raised my brother and I alone. He only had a 3rd grade education and spoke little English. As a result, I had to advocate and translate for him. I did the same thing for my neighbors. Those experiences helped me do a couple of things. It helped me realize the power of advocacy. It helped me realize my desire to serve my community. I also bring a broad legal experience. I've been a lawyer for 29 years, including the last 12, plus as a deputy city attorney in the Chula Vista City Attorney's Office. In my background, I've been a reserve sheriff's deputy, and I've also been in the Marine Corps Reserve as an infantry mortarman. As a lawyer, I've been a lawyer for 29 years, including 12 plus as a deputy city attorney. Among the things that I've done, I worked on labor and employment matters, affordable housing, governmental ethics, dealt with contracts, created resolutions and ordinances, as well as advised various boards and commissions. That legal experience is what you need of a city attorney, and that I'm prepared to do the job on day one. I'm committed to principled leadership, which means public input. It also means things like commitment to good government ethics, as well as serving my community. I'm able to lead on day one. I have the experience and the history to do so. I want to be your next city attorney. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's start with Mr. Moot. Can you describe to us what you think the job of city attorney is?
Well, the city attorney's job is to be the chief legal counselor for the city of Chula Vista, and that requires a wide variety of different hats that you will wear. One of the major hats is to be the attorney for the city manager. City manager is responsible for running the city, so as the city attorney, you're in effect general counsel for the city manager, who's responsible for the day-to-day operations. So all major city projects the city attorney works on with the city manager to make sure that they are properly presented, they're properly approved. But the city attorney also has the client of the city council. And his job as the attorney for the city council is to make sure that all the ordinances and statutes that are passed by the city of Chula Vista are legal and lawful. It's to give them proper legal advice when they do take on certain matters. And one of the major functions of the city attorney is to represent the city in litigation filed against the city. I looked at it some time ago. In the last 3 years, there were over 50 cases filed against the city of Chula Vista. So a major part of what the city attorney does is defending the city in litigation in court.
Thank you. Mr. Silva?
Well, the Chula Vista City Attorney, their role is to be the lawyer for the city of Chula Vista. It advises a whole litany of organizations within the city. It advises city council, the city manager, the different departments, as well as various boards and commissions. The city attorney is not a sixth council member. It doesn't decide policy. That's reserved really for the city manager and for city council. My role as city attorney would be to provide honest, straightforward, independent legal advice that looks out for the interests of my fellow Chula Vistans. In doing so, I advise city council not only on the law, but also the consequences and the impacts of their decisions, so they make the best decision that they can. I also have the obligation as city attorney to not only advise, but also to defend the city in various litigations, to be aware of cases that are against us. And we do so in terms of defense, but also taking mitigation measures so we avoid liability down the line. At the end of the day, our client is the city, and my job is to advise the best interests of the city.
Thank you very much. I want to remind you both to try and speak into your microphone as closely as possible.
Yours back there, okay? Is that any better?
There you go.
Oh,
Okay. All right.
Exactly the way we did it before, too, right?
Okay, Mr. Moot, if elected, what is the one change you would implement? What would be your top priority?
Boy, I don't know if there'd just be one, but
Give us more.
if I had to pick one, I think it would be to carefully review all the major contracts between the city and its various vendors. I think we saw 2 incidences recently in which there were provisions in major city contracts that didn't belong in there. One involving Republic Services contract that defined a strike as a unanticipated event. There was a provision in the Motorola contract that allowed citizens' private data to be sold to third parties. So if it hasn't been done already, I would certainly undertake that task. I think another thing that would be on my priority is the Chula Vista campaign ordinance. I think that it has not worked out well at all. There are currently 2 pending investigations that have been sitting for over 10 months and have not been resolved. And I don't think that's fair to the people who the complaints were filed against, nor fair to the citizens of the city who have major complaints that go unresolved for such a long period of time.
Thank you. Mr. Silva?
Again, I would join that there really isn't just one thing that we need to look at. I would break it up into a couple of things. I think one of the first things that I would want to do is create some, within our office or with the city manager's office, some form of audit or compliance oversight. I think we can have a uniform look at our different processes, our contracts, and other activities to make sure that we are in ability to provide the best legal advice to ensure that we carry out what it's supposed to do to prevent corruption, fraud, or abuse in those capacities, and to make sure that our processes are efficient and benefit the public. The other thing that I would also like to see is have the city attorney's office, for a city of our size, to have the ability to prosecute unfair business claims. Right now we have to rely on the DA, district attorney's office, and attorney general's office to pursue those types of claims. But I think we need to have that ability at the local level to protect our citizens here in Chula Vista.
Thank you. Mr. Moot, if elected, what would you have the city attorney's office do differently than it's doing now?
Another great question. When I was on the city council, I was a great believer in workshops. And I don't think that the city spends enough time with the city council vetting projects before they actually come to the city council for a vote. And I think that's invaluable in getting citizen participation involved in these projects. The advantage of doing it in a workshop setting is no one's under a pressure to actually vote on the project. You can vet your ideas, you can hear from the public, the applicants can speak, and if there are issues or problems that need to be worked out, often in a workshop setting and a more formal collaborative process, those matters can be worked out. So then when the project comes back to the council, I think not only does the city council have a better understanding of the project, but I think the public has had more and greater input into the process. So I think that's the one thing I would really like to implement that's different than the way it is now.
Thank you. Mr. Silva?
What I'd like to do is basically implement what I call my leadership principles, where I believe in high ethics, public participation, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The second component is that public participation. I think we need to have more of it. I think it's important that we reach out to our community to solicit their input on issues that are coming up, to listen to them in terms of what they would like to see done, and work collaboratively to develop an ordinance or a policy or a procedure that takes everybody's input into consideration. And then we also need to be held accountable. So once we meet, we develop a statute, I think we also need to have a component where we look at its efficiency to make sure that it actually works. And then to be able to have a willingness to go back and correct things as we go forward. And again, that's really important, the public participation, drafting something with the public being involved, and then being held accountable for its results.
Thank you. Mr. Silva, let's start this one with you. What do you think the city attorney's office can do about the homeless situation in Chula Vista?
I think there's a variety of things that we're able to do. I think one of the things that we can do is research the laws that currently exist that are out there in terms of homelessness, being able to get grants, program types that are out there, working with other city attorneys to see what their best practices are. So I think the first step is being able to gather information to come up with a plan. The second one is being able to coordinate with the city manager and city council to go out in the community to see what the needs are and what the issues are. Because there's issues in terms of being able to address the crime that's associated with homelessness in terms of litter, fights, drug abuse, things like that. There's also the social service aspect of how we can help people get out of homelessness in terms of drug addiction, housing, the litany of things that are out there. And then the last part is working with other stakeholders to draft a uniform approach to this, as opposed to a little bit here, a little bit there. I think we need a local approach here that fits the needs of Chula Vista. Our office can help to coordinate that. It can help to do the research and can help get the laws that in place that we need to achieve that goal.
Terrific, Mr. Moon.
Sorry, I missed the question.
Okay.
It has something to do with homelessness, I can tell
What-
that.
What do you think the city attorney's office can do to help with the homeless situation?
Okay, well, that's a big question, and I think the city attorney can do a lot in that particular area. I have a good friend who's been general counsel for the San Diego Housing Commission, and they are able to get from the state and federal governments a lot more housing money for homelessness than the city of Chula Vista is currently getting. And I think we need to build within the city a more vigorous housing commission so we can take advantage of the money that is out there to look at this problem. I also think the district attorney's office did an incredible job making a blueprint for mental health that dealt with the consequences of homelessness and how the interactions between homelessness and law enforcement and the courts. That's really got to end. The problem with homelessness is completely different. It's not a law enforcement problem by and large. It can be in certain situations. It has to be dealt with when it is. The homeless problem, there are a lot of people out on the streets who have lots of needs. And I think that getting more funds and more projects to address those needs are what needs to be done.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about the trash strike. This audience member said the trash strike was horrible. The city attorney did not communicate with us until January 9th via the Union Tribune. If you were the city attorney, what would you have done to reassure citizens that you were working behind the scenes on their behalf? Mr. Moon?
Well, another really good question. City attorneys should have immediately looked at the letter that invoked the uncontrollable circumstances clause and seen that it was completely defective. In order for them to evoke that clause, for them not to be in breach, there were certain things that had to be in that letter. They were not in that letter. One of those was they were going to have to state how long the uncontrollable circumstances would last. Now, putting aside that a strike is not an uncontrollable circumstance, they should immediately rejected the letter and said, you're a breach of contract. You have not properly invoked this clause. City attorney also should have immediately began using clauses in the contract. There was a provision in the contract that the city manager could have directed Republic to do certain things. The moment a week went by without the trash being picked up, they could have directed them to pick up the trash and then implemented the fine schedule that wasn't in the contract and fined them $25 for the first container not picked up and $50 for every time thereafter. There was also a performance bond in that contract. The performance bond could have been used to be picking up the trash. So those are some of the basics.
Thank you. Mr. Silva?
Yes, I think there are provisions in the contract that could have been enforced more vigorously. And if I were the city attorney, I would have immediately taken the steps to start enforcing it. We also need to make sure that in future contracts that we make sure that there is no force majeure clause that has any language that says that a strike is in fact a uncontrollable circumstance where we'd have to deal with it. It should just simply a clause that says in the event of a strike or some other labor stoppage, these are the steps that you would take. So I think we need to do that. I think the bigger issue was really how we communicated to the public. I tend to think that we needed to have a uniform communication to the public, one place where the public could look to for answers in terms of what's going on. Maybe a page on our website that was dedicated solely for Republic waste issues, so people knew what steps were being taken, where we were in the process, and then what their rights are in terms of recouping, monies that they lost or being charged for services they didn't get. In addition, I would also require that Republic Services, perform the contract, and any other vendor in the future perform their contract. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with you, Mr. Silva.
Yes.
Can you describe the surveillance techniques currently being used in the city and your position on those?
Well, surveillance is kind of a big question. The city does in fact gather data from individuals in various capacities. It does so as an employer, it does so in its daily activities, and it does through the various technologies. I think the big issue that we need with regard to surveillance, how we gather it, data and information, and the technology that we use, is to ensure that we have policies in place that protect people's privacy. There's a point where you gather data on an individual, and then there's a point where you begin to gather that data for the purposes of identifying what they're doing. And that's the surveillance component. And we need to avoid that. I don't think the public wants to be surveilled in anything they do, and they also want to have their data protection. Right now, I'm reviewing city contracts, especially police department technology contracts, to make sure data isn't shared with third-party vendors, either sold or shared. I'm also part of a city manager's task force that's tasked with developing different policies and procedures on the city's use of data and technology with regard to privacy and surveillance.
Thank you. Mr. Moon?
Well, I think the two major ones that we hear about are the drones as a first responder program and the license plate reading program. I'm a strong proponent of the drone as a first responder program. What it does is it allows police officers, when they get to the scene, to know what they're walking into. A drone can get there first. It can, with its camera, see whether the person is armed or dangerous, not armed or dangerous. In the case of a fire, they can know how bad it is before the firefighters get in there and surveil the situation. It's an incredibly useful technique. It enhances officer safety and allows the officers, when they get to the scene, to know whether they're dealing with a mental issue, a criminal issue, someone who's armed and dangerous. Now, the issue with the drone program, of course, is the privacy of the citizens, and that absolutely has to be protected. None of that private data should be sold to anybody. The drone footage, the camera should be turned off after it leaves the scene and is no longer needed to record. And even while it's traveling there, it should be on until it gets close to the scene. And I think those are some of the ways we protect the privacy in that program.
Thank you. The next question regarding marijuana. Do you know what the process is for opening a pot shop, and are the regulations being enforced currently? Mr. Moon?
Well, that's a good question for Simone. I think that's one of his areas of expertise. It's a project he has been working on diligently, as an assistant city attorney. The rules, I don't think, worked out particularly well. There was a problem, I think, with the vendor who was in charge of that program. I think right now we only have 2 or maybe just a third vendor who's opened up. The process has left a lot to be desired. It spawned litigation and lawsuits. I think it's one of the things that frankly needs to be relooked at, because frankly the city's been very slow in rolling out its marijuana program. And I think it's one of the things that has to be more carefully looked at, especially in hindsight.
Thank you, Mr. Silva.
Well, in terms of the process, there's an application that's submitted. They have to submit information regarding the background of the applicants, as well as different types of documents, their business plan, the amount of funds that they have available to dedicate to the business. Once they submit those, it goes through a review and scoring process. A ranking is done, and then based on the ranking, permits are issued. I tend to think that the process needs to be streamlined and reviewed to make sure that it's quicker, because it has taken too long of a time. There's also an appeal process that's there. Again, I think one of the things I would do as city attorney is do an audit of this program, identify where the deficiencies were, and correct them so it's a lot more streamlined in terms of getting permits issued out there. Right now, I believe there's currently 2 dispensaries that are open, one Grasshopper, and then the second a Marsh Nash, and I think a third one may be coming online as well. It's taken way too long to get 3 businesses out there, when I believe there's at least 2 per district that's allowed, as well as other types of marijuana businesses other than just storefronts.
Okay, this is another marijuana related. The question is, how would you have handled the issue of illegal marijuana? I don't know if that refers to illegal pot shops, but how would you have handled it? Mr. Moot?
two ways. There's civil enforcement provisions that can be taken against the owner of a building where one is operating. So you can have some leverage over them by forcing the owner of the building to take responsibility for that particular problem. The other is, I think you have to work more closely with the district attorney's office. The district attorney's office has jurisdiction over all crimes in the city of Chula Vista. A good relationship with the district attorney would help get more priorities of the district attorney's office available on that particular problem. I think, again, it's about building relationship with the other attorneys in the county and having a strong relationship with the district attorney's office to make sure the priorities of Chula Vista are met when it comes to illegal pot shops is extremely important.
Thank you, Mr. Silva.
At one point, the city of Chula Vista had around 36 illegal dispensaries operating, mostly on the west side. The city partnered with the DA's office. Its police department worked with our code enforcement and the DA's office as well. And then they ended up serving warrants to shut the businesses down. They pursued code enforcement actions as well as criminal prosecutions. And ultimately, all 36 were shut down. So it was really a team effort between the police department, the DA's office, and the city prosecutor that we have. The DA's office took the felony matters as well, and we took code enforcement matters, and then our city prosecutor took matters related to the people that were in the building operating and selling the marijuana. So it was a collaborative effort. I think right now, as far as I'm aware, we do not have any illegal dispensaries operating, but we went from 36 to 0 rather quickly once we were able to coordinate our efforts to address the issue.
Thank you. This question is, what are different qualifications to be a private attorney, the difference between a private attorney and a city attorney? Mr. Moon?
Well, I'm not sure there's a lot. I think a private attorney has to have the same or greater skill sets than the city attorney. There's a lot of litigation that the city attorney gets involved in. Private attorneys with strong litigation backgrounds, I think, are essential in the city attorney's office. Contract review is the same whether you're in private practice or you're in a city attorney's office. I think giving advice on employment matters, again, is the same whether you're in a private practice or in a city attorney's office. The prime difference would be in the drafting, I think, of ordinances. That is a specialty that the private attorneys typically don't get involved in, but these ordinances have to be drafted well. The findings have to be clear, so they're not subject to being appealed or challenged in court. And that would probably be the primary difference, I think, is drafting and implementing the city ordinances.
Thank you. Mr. Silva?
I tend to think being a municipal lawyer or having a city as your client is unique. There's different needs that they have, particularly in terms of governmental ethics. As a government entity, we're subject to the Political Reform Act, dealing with conflicts of interest on finances, 1090, which is another law related to conflicts of interest with contracting. We're also subject to the Public Records Act and the disclosure requirements there, the Brown Act in terms of having open meetings laws. There's also different ways that we have to contract in terms of the Public Resources Code, as well as prevailing wages and federal requirements that we have to do. We also have the ability to issue bonds for different types of projects that go out there, whether it's building projects, pension obligation bonds. Our budgeting is different, so you have to be aware of the budgeting laws that are out there. So there's a lot of different things that we do as a government entity that isn't applicable to a private entity. And as I, as city attorney, as deputy city attorney, have experience in those areas.
Thank you. I think this is our last question, so if anybody has any others, write them down. This question is, how is the job of an elected city attorney different than an appointed one? Mr. Silva?
I think workload-wise, it's the same job, because we still advise our client, we still face the same issues. The issue is who we're accountable to. And I tend to think by having an elected city attorney, we're held accountable by the public. And ultimately, that's who we work for. And I think that's an important aspect to being an elected city attorney, is that whenever I would do something as city attorney, I would be held accountable by the public. They're the ones that measure the expectations of what they want me to do. They're the ones that measure the quality of my performance and whether I'm doing things. And that's who we all serve as government employees. We serve the community and the public, and that's who we ultimately should be held accountable for. Recently, or within the last, prior to COVID, the Charter Review Commission did a poll as to whether the public wanted an elected city attorney and appointed, and it was overwhelmingly found that people still supported an elected city attorney. We work for the public, and we should be held accountable by the public. So I'm supportive of an elected city attorney.
Thank you, Ms. Rowe.
I agree with Simone. I think it's very important to have an elected city attorney. Elected city attorney has a third client, and that is the voters that put him in office. An appointed city attorney really has only one client that they need to please, and that's the city council. So when the city council is misbehaving, city council is not following the ordinances and the laws that are applicable to them, a appointed city attorney is in a very vulnerable position, because if he takes positions adverse to them, of course, they could just fire him and go find someone who will do what they want to do that may in fact not be legal. So it's the independence that an independent city attorney, I think, provides, and I think it's vitally important. I mean, ultimately, if you're out in the community, you're responsible to the community, people will hold you accountable, not only for the decisions you make, but for the advice that you give. And I believe a city attorney that's been involved in the community, has an extensive experience of the community, is a vitally important aspect to the job.
Thank you. Mr. Silva, let's start with you, because you touched on this. The question is, how long did it take to process the closure of the 36 illegal pot shops, and why did it take that amount of time? And can you see any way to have that done as a quicker shutdown process? And another question, we'll give you more time for this. After the Republic strike, will you review all contracts Chula Vista has with other services and businesses?
In terms of the timeframes, I think once they're able to start their coordinated efforts, it went rather quickly. From what I recall, it was around a 3-month period. It took a while to get there, but I think once they started, they were regularly going to the different dispensaries and shutting them down. I tend to think right now, just given the experience that they had from that, the ability to process and deal with illegal dispensaries can be done in a quicker basis than we previously did. What was the second part of the question?
After the Republic strike, would you review all contracts the Chula Vista City has with all the services and businesses?
Oh, absolutely. That's part of the audit and compliance component that I discussed earlier, that I tend to think we need to be auditing our procedures, and among those would be auditing our current contracts. We actually have a standard 2-party agreement that we use in place. For most agreements, we'll review that as well. I also want to add a component or an addendum to that, a contract that deals with privacy and software, and we can also, obviously, of course, we would look at all the contracts going forward. And it shouldn't just be done one time. I think we should regularly do it to make sure that we're up to date and address issues as they come forward.
Thank you. Mr. Moot?
Simone, of course, would know more about the time frame as he was directly involved in it. My recollection is that it took a lot longer than 3 months. I did have a client who had a commercial establishment in Chula Vista, and he was dealing with the problems of illegal dispensaries in his buildings and getting rid of them and getting them out and working with the city. And just the one incident that I was directly involved in with this owner, it took 7 to 8 months to get that problem resolved. So, I mean, I would stand, Simone's in a better position to know, but my experience with the one client I had, it took a lot longer than that just to get the one person out.
The second part of the question, would you review all the contracts the city has?
I think that's an absolute necessity.
Okay, one more question was brought up. Should the city attorney's office advise members of the public or nonprofits if they ask? Mr. Silva?
I think we can assist them in certain aspects, but generally, our client is the city of Chula Vista, and to advise a nonprofit or another entity may create a conflict of interest. There's information that I may have as a city attorney that may be relevant to them, but I'm not allowed to disclose because of attorney-client privilege. Same thing with that other entity. They may have information that is privileged to them that I would not be able to share. So in a general sense, no, I don't think we can directly advise anyone other than the city as a client. However, we can be helpful to direct them to other resources that are available, whether it's the San Diego County Bar Association, whether it's another entity that can help them. But I don't think we can take them on as a client, just given the ethical responsibilities of being a lawyer.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moon?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The city attorney's client is the city of Chula Vista. The city attorney can have no other client. It would be a conflict of interest included by the ethics of the State Bar of California for the city attorney to be advising anybody doing business with the city of Chula Vista other than his client, the city attorney's office. Yes, they can direct them to other potential resources, but I don't even think the city attorney could advise them as to another lawyer to go out and hire. The ethics of having only one client and not taking on matters that may be adverse to your one client is, I think, very clear under the state bar rules. So as much as you might want to help them and be empathetic, I don't think it's something that the city attorney could do.
Oh, late breaking news. Chula Vista has outsourced so many services due to budget and staff cuts. How do you oversee these outsourced works? Doesn't outsourced work cost the same or more than having Chula Vista staff in-house? Mr. Moot?
I'm not a big fan of outsourcing vital city services. I know it's a huge problem in the building department with getting permits reviewed and out the door quickly. I think it's a budgetary problem, to be quite frank. I think the city has to focus with a laser eye on getting projects that will increase revenue into the city of Chula Vista. I think the city attorney could be a partner with the city manager at identifying and fast-tracking projects that will bring sales tax and other revenue into the city, that will allow properties that have not been reassessed for 30 and 40 years to be developed and reassessed, because ultimately it's about money. I did 5 budgets when I was on the Chula Vista City Council. I'm intimately familiar with the challenges a bedroom community like Chula Vista has when it comes to the budget. And there's only one way to get out of the problem of outsourcing, and that is to put a laser focus on those projects will bring additional revenue into the city so you don't have to do it anymore.
Thank you. Mr. Silva?
In terms of outsourcing, I think the best people that can do city work is city employees. So I'm not a big advocate of outsourcing either. I do think that at times we need to do so just because of cost savings. However, when we decide to do that, I think we should allow the bargaining units to bid as part of the process to see if they can do a better job. The city actually has a policy in place that requires the city to inform the bargaining units when we're considering outsourcing, working with the bargaining units to make sure that they have an opportunity to keep those positions in-house and be able to be done by the city. One of the things I brought up earlier in one of my answers was one of the things I would do is that audit and compliance component to what I want to do. And I tend to think we need to have better oversight of those in terms of how we award them, how we manage them, and what the results that are there. That would be part of my duties as city attorney is having that oversight and auditing component as to those types of activities.
Thank you. Okay, there was one more question about why are you the best candidate, but I'm going to let you address that in your closing statement. But before they give their closing statements, I want to thank you all for attending and asking such good questions. Also, feel free to attend more league events. Go to our LWV San Diego League website. There's a calendar there with all of our events. And I'd like to thank the Chula Vista, Southwest Chula Vista Civic Association and Crossroads 2 for being our co-sponsors tonight. Okay, we're going to go to closing statements then. Mr. Silva, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start off just to clarify the role of city attorney. The city attorney is the advisor to city council and the department and the city manager. It's not a policymaker. It also doesn't serve as a sixth council member. Those decisions in terms of policy are made by council and the city manager. We provide legal advice to those groups. And I would provide honest, straightforward, independent legal advice. My job would be to advise them of the law, options, as well as the consequences of their actions so they make the best decisions in serving the public. I would do that as city attorney, and that's what I currently do. I'm also proud of the endorsement that I've received because I got endorsements from the mayor, the deputy mayor, a former council member, Steve Castanet, and they've all seen me advise them. And they know that I do in fact provide that honest, straightforward, independent legal advice. I don't mince my words. If they can do it, they can. If they can't, they cannot. And that's as simple as what I do. The other thing that's important is the city council will be entirely new pretty much. What that means is that they need somebody who's already been doing the job, somebody that has the experience, somebody that has the steady hand that's trusted to do the job. And I have that experience. Again, like I explained, I've been a lawyer 29 years, the last 12 plus doing the job as city attorney. I'm ready to lead on day one and do the job. They need somebody they can trust. They need somebody who has the experience doing the job for them. It's not a time to learn something new. It's the time to make sure that we perform our best, advise the council the best way they can. I'm uniquely qualified to do so given my background. I'm also experienced as a 29-year lawyer with 12 of which being in the office itself. And I also committed to principles of leadership that involved high ethics, public participation, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm the best candidate because I'm doing the job. I'm ready to lead on day one. I will work tirelessly to serve my community from day one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moon.
If the month-long trash strike has taught us anything, it's that Chula Vista needs private sector experience in the city attorney's office. Not only should there never have been a provision that defined a strike as an unforeseeable circumstance, preventing Republic from being in breach of contract, there were, as I mentioned earlier, other provisions in that contract that could have been immediately enforced, including fining and the performance bond, which were not done because there wasn't the private sector experience in the office to get it done. Worse yet, we are now 3.5 months later with no word on a rebate or whether ratepayers will have to pay the full 1 month in which their trash was not picked up. As a seasoned and experienced attorney who is used to dealing with billion-dollar corporations, I can assure you we can and will not make this mistake again. As your elected city attorney, I will have a zero tolerance policy for political corruption and governmental malfeasance. I will zealously guard against fraud, waste, and abuse of your taxpayer dollars and hold corporations accountable when they do not live up to the terms of their contracts with the city or in delivering guaranteed services to taxpayers. I can make this promise and deliver on it because that's what I have done throughout my legal career. I have a proven track record as an attorney, a record of achievement and experience serving on the city council, and that is why the police and firefighters have endorsed me. It's why the former Attorney General of the state of California and 2 former United States attorneys for the Southern District of California endorsed me. It's why 3 of our local Congress members, including Juan Vargas and our State Senator Ben Cueso, have endorsed me, and why so many other elected officials have done as well. As someone who's spent the greater part of my professional career being involved in this wonderful, diverse, and welcoming community, I can think of no other better way to finish my legal career than serving you and the city I love as your next city attorney. So thank you all for coming tonight, and have a great weekend.
Well, thank you all very much. Yes, give them a hand. The league motto is don't just be a voter, be an informed voter, and that's why you're all here today, so thank you again.